For those of you who are here with us, we're back in Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15. Hope that you've taken me up on my challenge. I hope that some of you are reading through that on a regular basis through the study. It's just such a rich passage, and I hope that as we've kind of looked at it from different angles, maybe you reading through that once a week on your own, you've picked up on some things as well. I've enjoyed studying the text myself. We're going to kind of recap just a little bit to kind of set the stage for today as we look at the older brother and the story of the lost son. So you need to understand that the folks listening to Jesus tell this story are all first century religious leaders. They're all Jews. They all are proper. They've got on their nice fancy robes and their nice fancy hairstyles like mine. They've got their neckties on, the whole 9 yards. They are the smart, put together, good people of the community. And that's important because you need to hear the story with kind of the ears they would have heard the story with. So when Jesus says that the younger son goes to his father and says, "Dad, you know what? I'd rather have your money and go out on my own than stay at home and live with you. I like your stuff better than I like you," they would have just gasped. What kind of terrible son would do that to their father? That is ridiculous. And when the father said, "Sure, you think you can do better without me? You're welcome to try," they would have been aghast. What in the world? What is that father? There is no father in the world who would do that. Why didn't he smack his son? What is he thinking? They're just in shock. And when the son takes his father's money to a foreign country and he wastes it on wild living, they're just shaking their head in judgment. Not only is it's not bad enough that he embarrassed his family, but then he's going to waste everything. That money took his father years to put together, and he wasted it in a matter of weeks. What an idiot. When the younger son ends up in the pig pen, they would have smirked. Serves him right. You live like an idiot, you have to deal with the consequences of your choices. I hope he stays in the pig pen forever, they would have thought. And when the younger son decides he's going to come home, they would have just shaken their heads. What's he going to do at home? He can't go home. After all he's done, after all he's wasted, there's no way they're going to let him come home. And the moment Jesus says, "And the father ran to him and threw his arms around him," their jaws would have hit the floor. You're kidding me. All the stuff he did, the terrible choices he made, and the father's just going to welcome him home and throw him apart. You've got to be nuts. And I tell you that because we're going to read this part of the story that involves the older brother. And I know that 2,000 years of Christian theology have taught us that the older brother is the villain in the story. He's the dumb one. But I need you to understand that when Jesus is telling the story for the first time to a group of Jewish religious leaders, the older brother is the only one making sense. He's the only one who's rational in the entire story. We're going to pick up reading in verse 25 of Luke chapter 15. Now his older son was in the field. As he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he summoned one of the servants and asked what these things meant. "Your brother is here," he told him, "and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." Then he became angry and didn't want to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him, but he replied to his father, "Look, I have been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him." Now again, I know that we are taught to read this story with the younger son who comes home and accepts his father's grace as the hero of the story, and the older son is the judgmental, vindictive villain of the story. But can we just be honest with each other for a minute? The younger son makes a lot of sense, right? In our sense of righteousness and justice, The younger son, the one who ran away, the one who told his father he didn't care if he died, he just wanted his money, the one who went and lived wildly in the foreign country and wasted everything, the one who comes back stinking of pig manure, he shouldn't be the one getting a party. That's not fair. There should be consequences for his bad choices. The closest thing I can think of, and I promise I'm not piling on here. Do you remember last winter when the city of Cleveland threw a parade for the 0-16 Cleveland Browns? And I'm not, you're going to be miserable enough as a Browns fan. I don't need to pick on you anymore. All right, but understand, there's something stupid about throwing a parade for a team that didn't win a game. And I know that particular parade was kind of sarcastic and ironic, and they were kind of making fun of themselves. But can you imagine if they'd done it for real? Imagine if they'd hired 10 marching bands and 20 floats, and they had fireworks going off and live music playing and food. Look at us! We tried hard! We showed up every week. Cheer up! We don't celebrate failures. We don't throw graduation parties for kids when they drop out of high school. Nobody gets together and throws a 10-year anniversary of the day they got fired. Those are just not things we do. We don't celebrate, as a culture, we don't celebrate mistakes and mess-ups and failures. That's exactly what the Father's doing. The younger son has been nothing but a mistake and a mess-up and a failure from the beginning of the story. And I know that we like to fantasize in our mind that he had been some kind of transformed, magical, everything was better, but that's not in the story. Maybe he was. Maybe he had a radical life change and cleaned but as I read the story, he comes home smelling of pig manure. He hadn't cleaned up anything when the father sees him. And so when the older son comes on the scene and says, "Dad, what are you doing?" On the surface, he's the first guy to speak rational sense in the whole story. And the Jews listening to Jesus would have gone, "Man, that's my hero there." And you know how I know the Jews would have loved this guy? Do you remember way back at the beginning of the chapter when Jesus starts the story? The Pharisees were grumbling and complaining because Jesus was welcoming and eating with sinners. What's the older brother complaining about? That the father has welcomed and is eating dinner with a sinner. Jesus takes the Pharisees and drops them right in the story. And here's the thing, while on the surface, he might make some sense. If we look underneath the surface, what we find is that the older brother, he's just as lost as the younger brother. All the way through this series, I've been calling it the story of the lost sons. In the very beginning of the story, when Jesus starts telling the parables, we have the story of the lost sheep who is far from home and is lost. And then the story of the lost coin that is lost right at home. And what we read when we read the older brother's story is that just like the younger son left home to get lost, the older brother, he never left his dad's house. He ate dinner with his dad every day. He lived in his father's home his whole life, and he was just as lost. And I know he was lost for two reasons. The first one is this. He had a shattered relationship with his brother. Listen to what he says. We're going to look at his speech specifically, so we're going to drill down in to verse 29 and 30. And in verse 30, when he's talking to his father, this is what he says. He says, "When this son of yours came home." Those of you who are married and have had a child, you've had this conversation before, right? Go get your son. Not our son. Not my son. Whatever he's doing right now, he is your son. You go take care of it. That is all your fault. You've had that conversation before, right? My son going, "Yeah, that's all me. I'll take the blame for that." The older brother comes home and he says, "This son of yours." He's completely disowned his brother. He has no grace for him, no forgiveness for him, no love for him. This son of yours comes home. And here's the problem. Even if the older son wants to have fellowship with his dad, even if the older son wants to go in and celebrate with the presence of his dad, he comes back from the field and he hears dancing and he hears music and he thinks, man, it's going to be a great time tonight. My friends are over. Even if he wants to go in and enjoy intimate fellowship with his father, he can't because his brother's in there. And until he fixes that relationship with his brother, he'll never have real fellowship with his father. Because his father has already thrown his arms around the younger son. His father has already put a coat around the younger son. His father has already killed the fatted calf. His father has already said, welcome into the fellowship. And so he cannot have a healthy relationship with his dad without fixing what is broken with his brother. The man who cannot live with his brother obviously cannot live within the family fellowship. And thereby harmony with his father will always be impossible. That's John MacArthur. Let me read that again. The man who cannot live with his brother obviously cannot live within the family fellowship. And thereby harmony with his father is impossible. The spiritual application here is incredibly obvious and incredibly personal. Jesus is telling in story form what the New Testament will teach over and over and over again. That you cannot love God and hate his children. 1 John, he says that if you claim to love God but you hate your brother, then you are a liar and the truth is not in you. You cannot have a healthy, functional relationship with God the Father while holding resentment and bitterness and judgment in your heart towards your brother. It's just impossible. And the reason it's impossible is because your heavenly Father has already welcomed them in. Whether they were an addict or a gossip or a slanderer, or they have bad doctrine, or they hurt your feelings, or whatever they've done, the Father has already welcomed them. He said, come in, let's celebrate. I'm so glad you've come home. I want to rejoice with you. I want to dance with you. I want to fellowship with you. And so as the older brother who's been there his whole life, I can't go see my dad without seeing my brother. And until I fix what's broken between me and my brother, there will always be tension between me and my father. Someone who cannot love his brother cannot live within the family fellowship, and therefore can never have true harmony with the Father. And some of us, we've lived that. We know that. And we're trying our best to have this great, healthy relationship with our Heavenly Father. In our hearts, there's so much resentment and anger towards our brothers and sisters that our relationship with God will never be right. And we're lost. And I'm not using the word lost as in who gets to go to heaven and who doesn't get to go to heaven. God decides that. I don't get to decide that. But I can tell you that the bulk of the New Testament teaches this. If you cannot live in harmony with your brother, then you are not living in harmony with God. And in Jesus' story, he's looking at these Pharisees who said, we hate those tax collectors. How could you possibly eat with those sexual sinners? They're just terrible people. And Jesus looks at them, puts them in the story, and says, listen, until you learn to live at peace with them, you'll never be at peace with God. If you do not live in harmony with your brother, you cannot live in harmony with God. The older brother's lost. Here's the other reason I know he's lost. It's not just his relationship with his brother that's messed up. It's his relationship with his dad, too. We'll jump to verse 29. When the son first comes in, the father has come out to plead with him, and then verse 29 he says this, but he replied to his father, look, I have been slaving many years for you, and I've never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. Imagine with me for a moment that you had a friend who every single Friday on his way home from work stopped by the florist and picked up a beautiful bouquet of flowers to take home to his wife. Now, husbands, I'm sorry for putting that idea in your wives' minds. Don't make your husbands do this. So let's imagine for a moment, every Friday, they've been married 35 years. For 35 years times 52 weeks, every Friday afternoon he stops by, buys a $20 bouquet, takes it home, fresh flowers on the table. You're just, oh man, that guy is so sweet. He's so romantic. Look at him. Now let's just dig just a little bit deeper. Let's pretend that our imaginary person, because no real person does that, our imaginary person, you find out that he does this because when he and his wife got married, they signed a prenuptial agreement. And in the agreement was, at least once a week, you must bring me fresh flowers. And if you don't, I will leave you and I get to keep everything. Doesn't seem so romantic anymore, does it? Kind of sucks the joy right out of our sweet romantic man. He's buying them on Friday because he forgot Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and he wants to keep his Camaro, and so he knows he's got to stop and buy flowers on the way home. It's amazing how the exact same action, when done out of duty or obligation instead of out of love, has a completely different meaning. Did you catch what the older son said? All these years I've been slaving for you. Yeah, he'd been there. He'd helped fix the fence. He'd plowed the field. He'd helped slaughter and butcher the animals. He'd gone to town functions. He'd hosted parties. He had been in his father's house and been a good, faithful, dutiful son, and not once had it ever been out of love. Not once had he ever done it because he wanted to see his father smile. He did it as a slave would work for his master. Those are his words, not mine. All these years I've been slaving for you. And what did he want? A goat, not so he could celebrate with his father, so he could go be with his friends and have a good time. He was no better than the younger son. He wanted his dad's stuff, not his dad. All these years I've been doing the good things because I thought it would earn me your favor. I thought I would get a blessing if I stayed and I did what good sons do, and you never gave me what I wanted. He didn't have any better relationship with his dad than his brother does. He is just as lost. And again, I will tell you, the spiritual application here is obvious and incredibly personal. Because I'm telling you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, there are Christians all across this country in churches this very morning who are just like the older brother. They go to church every Sunday because they feel guilty if they don't. I have to go to church. That's what good Christians do. And they open their Bible and they read their Bible because I got to keep God happy, and God will be mad with me if I don't read my Bible. And I know I'm supposed to pray, so I got to find 10 minutes a day to pray, or God may strike me with lightning. Got to be the good Christian. When's the last time God struck someone with lightning anyway? I don't know why we say that, but just, hypothetically. I got to make sure I give. The Bible commands me to give, so I guess we're not going on vacation this year. Let me give my money. And they do all the things you would expect a follower of Christ to do. In fact, to a casual observer, they would look like a very good, wonderful person. And yet, truth be told, they would have the same response as the older son. God, all these years I've been slaving, following you. And what'd you give me? You understand that all those things we think of as obligations and duties, they're not really for God. Like, God he didn't invent prayer because he needs to know what's on your mind. God's not up there going, oh, I didn't know Aunt Betty had a cold. Thanks for telling me. I was unaware. God didn't have the scriptures printed and protected and passed down through the generations so he could get some kind of pleasure from you reading it. It's for your benefit. He's giving you access to himself. The King of all the universe, the creator of everything, says, come into my presence and I will listen to you and I will speak to you. Don't you want to come have a relationship with me? And we turn it into some ritual that we have to do or we feel guilty about it. And God doesn't, listen, this is going to sound bad coming from the priest. God doesn't need our offerings. He owns the entire world. What are you going to give him that doesn't belong to him anyway? He asks us to give so that we learn to live dependent upon him. It's for our benefit, not his. And so we can keep the lights on. But that's another... All of those things are good things. But the appropriate relationship is to come as a son who loves his father. To come as a son or a daughter who loves his father and wants to spend time with him and wants to be a part of his family and is desperate to live in relationship with him and doesn't consider it sacrifice to give, considers it a privilege to give, doesn't consider it a burden to do the right thing, considers it an honor to live as a child of God. We are sons and daughters, not slaves and servants. One of the best things I read as I was kind of prepping this week, I actually threw it out online earlier this week. John Piper wrote the following sentence. He said, far too often we expect or we think that we're doing these things for God's benefit. That we're going to somehow... The older son thought that the father needed him. That the farm would have fallen apart and he should get some sort of reward for doing all the good things sons do, or everything would have fallen apart. And he had in his mind that the dynamic was, I have to do the work for the father because he needs me. And John Piper wrote this sentence. He said, the gospel is not a help-needed sign. God doesn't say, come follow me because I need you. God doesn't need anything. God is completely independent, supreme, and all-powerful, sitting on his throne. He doesn't need me. The gospel is not a help-needed sign. The gospel is a help-available sign. I have what you're looking for. I have the joy you're looking for. I have the happiness you're looking for. I have the purpose and meaning you're looking for. I have the love you're looking for. Would you just stop thinking you have to earn your way there, that somehow by being a good person and doing good things, you'll earn my favor? You already have my favor. I already am crazy about you. Just come and enter into my fellowship. And my favorite part of this part of the story in verse 25, and it's just one word. It says, the father came and pleaded with his son. The father desperately wanted the son to come into the party. The father desperately wanted to celebrate with his son. The father desperately wanted to throw his arms around the older son as he had just thrown them around his younger son and say, come and celebrate with me. And the older son just couldn't get over his pride. But I'm not like that younger son. I didn't mess up like him. I didn't waste your money. I'm a good person. Look at all, I want you to love me for what I've done. And that's not the gospel. The gospel is I love you in spite of what you've done. Lay down your pride, lay down your ego, and come and enjoy my love. Stop making it about obligation, stop making it about duty, and just accept my love. So we're going to sing a song we sang earlier today. It's called I Love You, Lord. This is going to kind of be our prayer. You know, we heard the story, and it's always, the younger son is always the hero, but it has been my experience that for us church folk, most of us have never been the younger son. Some of us have. Some of us have really had some wild living in our days. Most of us, we grew up in church. We've tried hard to be good. We've tried to do the good thing. We try to... And we're the older son. We're here right in the Father's house, and we are still lost, still thinking we have to earn our way into heaven, still being bitter with our brothers and sisters, and never really living in the love and grace of God. And so for us older brothers in the room, let this be our prayer. God, we're not here because we have to be. We're not here because we feel guilty. We are here because we love you, Lord. And we want to worship the Father who has lavishly loved us back. Why don't you stand and let's make that our prayer together this morning.